Today we're going to learn Pesachim Daf Pevav. Today's daf is sponsored by Judith Weil in memory of Rav Eliyahu Chaim Greenberg Zichrono Livracha on his 46th Yahrzeit. Grandpa showed his love for his children and grandchildren through learning Gemara with them. And by Dr. Stu and Ellen Shafran to commemorate the 18th Yahrzeit of Sarah Bat Moshe Zichrono Livracha, Ellen's mother, which was yesterday, 2nd of Adar. She survived the Shoah in Shanghai. Very much valued learning and would have been extremely proud that her granddaughter is now learning her second cycle and her daughter her first. And for Fuash Lema of David Ben Idol, Betoch Sha'ar Chole Israel. Okay, we're going to get started with our daf. Just to refresh your memory, we were at the end of Pehei Amud Bet. We're actually at the top of Pevav, but at the end of Pehei Amud Bet, it said a chalonot ve'ovi hachoma, the windows and the thickness of the walls, right? If something's on the walls, the whole question was that sanctified, right? And we said it's like being, right? We said they're kilifnim. They're considered part of the inside. This is all about when we're eating the Korban Pesach or other sacrifices that can only be eaten, let's say, within the Azara. And when is it considered taken out? What's considered in? What's considered out? We'll get into more details of this today. To which Rav said, the gagim and the aliyot lo nitkadshu, the roofs and the second floors were not sanctified. So whether we're talking about within Jerusalem or, which was the question we asked yesterday, what do you mean it's not sanctified? We ended the daf with the beginning of today's daf, which was, weren't the people singing Hallel in the roofs? How could they be singing Hallel in the roofs if they can't eat in the roofs because the roofs weren't sanctified? To which we answered, it must have been they went there after eating, probably because it was crowded in the house with all the people. So when they were able to spread out more, they spread out more and went into the roof, but not when they were eating. Now we're going to bring several questions on Rav from, let me just look, looks like 3 questions on Rav, specifically about the temple itself. And what about the upper levels? Okay, we're going to learn now that the temple didn't just have the level that we normally see when we see a map of the temple. Okay, I'll pull one up just so you get to see a map of the temple. Here. Okay, this is from Wikipedia. You can find it there. If you look at Second Temple. So here you have, this is the left-hand side here is the Azara, this whole area. Here's Sha'ar Nikanor that we were talking about. That's the gate that went into it. Here's the 4 Lishakot in the Ezrat Nashim area. Okay, here's the entrance from the east side on the right. Okay, now we're going to talk soon about these Lishakot, okay, that are here. We'll get back to these soon. Okay, but this is the temple area. Here's when we talk about the Azara and it's sanctified. This is the area that we're talking about. Okay, this whole area, which has in it the Heichal, it has the Kodesh Kodeshim at the end here. It has, right, this Ulam. There's all these steps we're going to see, right? Sha'ar Nikanor had steps, this rounded thing, or steps leading up to Sha'ar Nikanor. Then there's steps going from the Ezrat Kohanim to the Ezrat Yisrael, which is a small, narrow area when you walk in, up going forward. And then there's these steps beyond the Mizbeach. There's steps going up to the Ulam. Okay, so here's a picture. Let's see. Yeah, there you can see the steps going upward. Okay, now let's go back to the daf now. So we're going to start with it's about the 5th line or 6th line, Tashma. Abba Shaul Omer. Okay, let's learn from this source. Here's a Talmudic source. It says, Abba Shaul Omer, it's a Tosefta from the first parak of Kelim. Abba Shaul Omer, Aliyat Beit Kodshei Kodeshim Chamura mi Beit Kodshei Kodeshim. We always think of the holiest of holy places. Where is it? It's the Kodesh Kodeshim. We all know that. Kohen Gadol goes only once a year, right? And there's always this fear, maybe he'll die inside. It's a very, so to speak, scary place, right? But it's got the highest level of sanctity. But now they're going to say, guess what? The upper level, there was a level above it. Okay, so again, like I said, the map just looks like there's one level, but there was a whole level of things above it. It's Chamura mi Beit Kodshei Kodeshim. Believe it or not, the level of Kedusha there is stronger. Okay, holier. Shebeit Kodshei Kodeshim, Kohen Gadol nichnas lo pam achat b'shana. V'aliyat Beit Kodshei Kodeshim ein nichnasim la ela. Okay, before I continue, let me just say. So the Kodesh Kodeshim, only once a year the Kohen Gadol would come in. And guess how many times they went into the Aliyah of the Kodesh Kodeshim? Pam achat b'shavua. Shavua doesn't mean a week. A Shavua is a week of, it's a way of saying one every 7 years, okay, in the Shemitah cycle. It's called like a Shavua of the Shemitah cycle, once every 7 years. Some people say twice in 7 years. And some even say once every 50 years. Okay, that's crazy. Now, why would they even go in there? What were they doing in there? So they say, Leda mahit tzricha. It's to find out what was needed, meaning, right? This is a classic example, okay? We always think of this holy, holy of places, but the holiest of holy places needed sometimes some construction done, some fixing, the roof was leaking. So someone had to go in there once in a while and check what was the situation. When we learn midot, you'll see, right? There's a lot of that going on in the temple, or shkalim also, we're going to learn different things about how the inner workings of the temple worked. And, in the end, it's a building and it needs upkeep and it needs someone checking, right? There's a whole thing. We talked about this before. What are you doing? You have to fix the Kodesh Kodashim. How do the workmen get into the Kodesh Kodashim? So this also. So now we say this must have had higher level sanctity because they didn't allow people in to check it, once a year, twice a year. No, only once every, depending on what your opinion is. So how could that be if Rav said the aliyot, the upper levels, were not sanctified? This seems like it clearly was. Amar Rav Yosef, mehechal nekam b'nei tivinish, what you're going to question from the hechal, from above the Kodesh Kodashim, shane hechal dichtiv. No, this is different because here it says, Vayitem David l'Shlomo beno et tavnit ha'olam ve'et batav ve'eken hazakav ve'aliotav ve'chadarav ha'pnimiyim u'beit ha'kaporet. This is a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, which says that David gave Shlomo the exact blueprints to certain areas in the temple. Okay, that's not so significant yet. Uchtiv hakol b'chtav miyad Hashem alai yiskil. But all of it came directly from God. That means that when we're talking about certain areas, when we talk about was this area sanctified or not, did the people determine when they came back and rebuilt the second temple, were they going to sanctify this? That's different. There's a few exceptions to that rule. And the Kodesh Kodashim is one of them because it's mentioned in this verse of the things that came directly from God, like the Chadarav HaPnimiyim, the inner rooms. Okay, these came directly from God. And there it says the Aliotav. Those came directly from God and God determined they would be sanctified. So that's different. Those are exceptions to the rule. Okay, but if it wasn't mentioned in that verse, then we're going to go by no aliyot and no roofs. Any of the second floors or the roofs are not sanctified. Second question against Rav for today, right? We already had one yesterday, and now we're going to, as I said, 3 today. Tashma. Okay, now we're going to get back to what I said before on this picture. There, right when you walk into Sha'ar Nikanor, if you go all the way to the north or all the way to the south, right, because you're right in the center there, then there's the Lishkat Gazit, and if you see there's 2 other, it's nice to have pictures that pull up when you go on them. Okay, this one doesn't tell you very much, but there's 3 over here in the north, and there's 3 in the south. Okay, they're a little bit positioned differently on each side, but there's 3 in the north and 3 in the south. Now, if you see here, it says here's the Chel HaSoreg, right? This is the border, the rim around these rooms. Now, around the whole area. Now, the question is, it says here, there's different ones that have different situations. We'll explain right now. So the lishakot, a lishka is like a room, an anteroom. Habnuyot b'kodesh, they're in the azara there, right? So it's a room within this azara area. Uptuchot lachol, but if their entranceway, the way in and out, is outside, which basically leads out to the Har HaBayit, to the Temple Mount, then tochan chol, then their inner area is actually, even though they're technically speaking within the walls of the Azara, they're going to be considered chol, okay? But gagotehen kodesh, but their roofs are sanctified. Again, seems to go against Rav. Rav said no roofs are sanctified. So Tirgama Rav Chisda explained, Bishe gagotehen shavin lekarka zaran. This is why I explained things were up with stairs. Because in the end, you could say that the roof of those buildings could have been flush with the floor of the Azara, certainly, let's say, where the Ulam was, right? Where already there was a big staircase going up. So you could have a room that the roof of it is the same level as the Azara. So because the roof was the same level, that's not considered a roof. That's considered main level, okay? So that's why that's the case. But now they say, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense because look at the continuation of that source. It says, but the ones that were built in the chol, in the areas that weren't sanctified, but they enter straight into the kodesh. Tochan kodesh v'gagotehen chol. They have the opposite halacha. Their inner part is actually sanctified because it opens up into the kodesh, and their roofs, though, are not sanctified. The isal kadatach, and if you're going to say Bisha gagotehen shavin lekarka zara. If you're going to say, now, why would their roofs be chol, right? Let's say you say their roofs are shavet. If you're going to say in the previous one that the roofs, we're actually not even going to focus right now on why the roofs are chol, but they're going to say if the roofs were the same height as the azara, then this underneath part, which is the room itself, which opens up into the Kodesh, shouldn't be sanctified. Why? Because Haviele Mechilot, it becomes underground then. And if it's underground, in other words, this seemed to say, take the same room, the same height. It all just depends. Does it open up into the Kodesh or does it open up into the Chol? If it opens into the Kodesh, it's sanctified. Opens up into the Chol, it's not, irregardless of the height and all that. And then the roofs have the opposite halacha of the room. So it seems like we're talking they're the same height, and then maybe the same height as the Azara, the way we described it, which then doesn't make any sense because now this part is going to be underground, and we already learned Amar Rabbi Yochanan Michilot lo nitkadshu. The underground areas in the temple were not sanctified. Remember, we talked about that. That was the way the kohanim, if they became impure, they would go in the underground mechilot that weren't sanctified, and that's how they would get out of the temple. So Kika Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So now we're going to limit Rabbi Yochanan. When he said the mechilot aren't sanctified, he only meant underground areas biptuchot laharabayit that open up into the outside. But Kitanya hi biptuchot lachol. But these that open up into the chol, those are not going to be right. I'm sorry. Those that open up into the azara are going to be considered sanctified. So we're basically taking Rabbi Yochanan's words about the underground areas aren't sanctified. That's only if they open up to the outside. But if they open up to the inside, into the azara, then they will be sanctified. V'hatanya, but wait, doesn't it also say in a Braita that Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mechilot mitachat heichal chol? The mechilot that are under the heichal are chol. So that again seems to contradict. There it doesn't seem to distinguish where it opens up into. So again, Kitanya Aisha Ptuchot Lachol. Even though it didn't say it, we're going to assume that what he meant was those are the ones that open up into the chol. If they open up into the side that goes outside to the Harabayit, they won't be sanctified. So again, we basically conclude that anything, we have two things we learned here. Anything that opens up into the Kodesh is Kodesh. Anything that opens up into the chol is chol. But the roof of the ones that are chol, in other words, if it itself is chol, but if the roof is flush with the height of the azara, then we're going to assume that also the roof there is sanctified, and that doesn't go against Rav because that's an exception to the rule. Tashma, third question against Rav. V'gago kodesh, the continuation of that Braita we just quoted by Rabbi Yehuda. It says, Mechilot mitachat echal uchol v'gago kodesh, but the roofs of those underground are sanctified. V'tizbera, could that really be? It can't possibly be that the roof here is sanctified. Why not? Because it says, Hakatane, it says in a Braita, Gagim halalu. Now, if it was sanctified, what would that mean? Let's go back to understand what sanctification means. Sanctification means, if it's sanctified like the Azara, then the rules of the Azara apply. What are the rules? Number one, you can only slaughter in the Azara. There's a difference between Kochim Kalim and Koche Kochim. Koche Kochim can be slaughtered only in the northern part. That's where the Beit Mikbachayim is. Kochim Kalim, like Shlamim and Korban Pesach, can be slaughtered anywhere in the Azara, but it has to be in the Azara. And number two, Kochim can only be eaten in the walls of the Azara, but they can be eaten in the walls of the Azara, which would mean if the roof here, Gago Kodesh, then we're going to assume one can eat there, Kochim, and one can slaughter there any animal. So, but now we're going to see in a Braita it says, Gagin halalu, ein ochlim sham Koche Kodeshim, ve'ein shochatim sham Kochim Kalim. So how can you possibly say, Ve'ela kashya gago kodesh? How did you say the roofs are kodesh? You can't do these things there, so obviously it's not kodesh. So now we're going to learn that there's partial kedusha to these rooms. It doesn't mean they're fully kodesh, that you can do all those things. No, it doesn't have the same status as the Azara, but they are kodesh for one thing. Amar Rav Chama bar Guria la'otan shte amot. There were two measuring sticks in the temple that were the size of an amah. We'll see why there were two. It wasn't just so there'd be enough to go around. And we'll see that they weren't exactly an amah, but each one was a measuring stick of approximately an amah. We'll see in a minute what this was. And they were stored in that room, meaning they were sanctified enough to have utensils that were needed in the temple, like the amah, stored in them. You need some sort of sanctity to allow that. That's what we're talking about, the roofs of the heichal, okay, of these rooms. Okay, the roof of these those rooms we had, right? The mechilot mitachat heichal were kodesh, and the roof of it was, it was chol, and the roof of it was kodesh. So now let's see about these amot. Titnan, as it says in the Mishnah, Okay, it's a Mishnah, I believe, in Midot, right? Or no, it's a Mishnah in Kalim, actually. Mishnah in Kalim. Shte amot hayu b'Shushana Bira. Oh, we're getting on Purim. Here we have Shushana Bira. Okay, there was a room called Shushana Bira. Okay, they called it Shushana Bira. It was this upper area. They had a depiction of Shushana Bira there. Some people say it was to kind of in thanks to the Persians who allowed the Jews to rebuild the temple. So they put a depiction there of Shushana Bira. Anyway, they called this area the Shushana Bira. So one in the northeastern corner and one in the southeastern corner of the room. Okay. Now each one was put in a different place in the room. It's interesting. Each had its own specific location. The one that went on the northern side of the room. If you remember, I think we talked about this before. If not, it was definitely in the last cycle of the daf, but that there were amot. I'm pretty sure we got to this in this cycle also. There were probably in Masechet Shabbat, but I don't remember exactly, but there were amot, right? There's an amma. Some people say there's 5 tvachim in an amma, and some people say there's 6 tvachim in an amma. And then there's sochakot, right? The mitzum samot, either they're tight or they're loose. Anyway, Moshe, when he built the Mishkan, we have all these descriptions of the kelim and how many amot they were. They say all the amot of Moshe were 6 tfachim ammas, okay? 5 handbreadths to an amma. Right? Because an amma is just measuring your arm. So, different people's arms are different sizes. Likewise, different people's hands are different sizes, right? So basically what they did is they had these 2 measuring sticks that were like the amma of Moshe, but, tefach is made of 4 etzbaot. Each one, one was 1 etzba more than a Moshe. Let's read it inside. So, so the first one was Yitera al shel Moshe chatzi etzba. One was a half an etzba bigger. The other one was 1 etzba, whole etzba, meaning it was larger than the other one by a half an etzba. So half a finger's width, okay, not a finger length, but a finger's width. So each one was half an etzba greater than the other and 1 greater than Moshe's. Okay, now why would this be? So, lama haya achat gdola ve'achat ktana? Sheyu ha'umanim notzlim b'ktana u'machzirim b'gdola k'dei shelo yavo lidei me'ilah. If they hired people to build something in the temple and they said, we need something 5 amot, let's say, and everyone makes a little bit of a mistake and they make it a little smaller, they ended up getting paid for doing something that they didn't from temple money, which means the temple money is sanctified. They're going to end up with misuse of consecrated money because they didn't actually build what they were supposed to. So because of the margin of error, we increase the amma so that anyone who wants to build something in the temple has to build it larger than an amma so that if they err a little bit, right, they'll end up with the right size and we won't have a problem with Me'ilah. So now we have to explain why do we need 2 though? 1 would be enough. Why 2? 1 for gold and silver, which costs more money. There, we're only going to make you do a half an etzba more. But lebinyana for building, we're going to make you do a whole etzba more, okay? Because if it's stone or something like that, which doesn't cost as much money, we'd rather, fix it so that we're really sure. But when it comes to gold and silver, since basically the workers are losing out here, we don't want to make them lose out by too much. Today in general, okay, this is the first look at perspective of some worker. Today we're going to see a lot of the rest of the daf is going to be perspective on different workers and different people in the community and how we need to look out for the different members. So it's interesting. Okay, moving on. Tnan. Now we're back to our Mishnah. So those were our questions on Rav. We responded and answered all the questions. Last line in the Mishnah, the windows and the thickness of the wall are considered like inside. Well, this isn't going to match what we just said because bishlama chalonot I understand. What did we say? It has to be on the height level of the azara. Now, theoretically, let's say in the entranceway to the azara, you could have a window that's high off the ground, but it could be the same height as the azara floor further on. So you could see that a window could become sanctified as long as it's on the height of the azara. But obviously the wall, the wall was very high. It doesn't make any sense that you'd have a wall that would be low on the height of the azara. It doesn't make any sense. So what did they say? You can find it in the wall. There was like a support wall next to the wall that was very low to just kind of help support the wall. That you could find. We're going to see how we know there was such a thing. Dichtiv, as it says in Eicha, V'ye'eval chel v'choma. It's interesting. Eicha is a book that's kind of poetic, but they're using it to learn details here about the temple. It says, right, that the chel and the choma, okay, we're going to have to explain what exactly is the chel. The chel and the wall went into avelut, right? They were mourning the loss of Jerusalem, right? This is obviously poetic. This isn't for real. Va'amar Rabbi Acha v'Itamar Rabbi Chanina shura ubar shura. They explained it was the wall and the wall that was next to it. The chel was the supporting wall. So that could have been at the height of the Azara, and that must be what they mean when they talk about the thickness of the wall and putting something on there. Okay, and that area would be sanctified. Okay, new Mishnah. Shtei chavurot, and last Mishnah for the chapter. We're going to finish the parak today. Shtei chavurot shayu ochlim b'bayit echad. If we have one korban pesach, and we're going to see a debate about this, we're going to say our Mishnah obviously only holds by one of the opinions of this debate. We have one korban pesach, and we split into two groups. And let's say the two groups are eating in the same house. Rashi explains that this means if they want to, even though we're all eating the same animal, if we split into two groups for eating, you can go in your group there, and we can go in our group here, and we cannot be facing each other. It's okay if we're back to back. We don't have to all be in one big group. It doesn't matter if we're not facing each other. You can see that we're going to have this whole thing about facing, and it's going to come up throughout the daf. And it seems like this maybe also had to do with the way they generally ate in those days. And it could be a lot of today's stuff has to do with etiquette, and etiquette particularly in those days, because etiquette, as we know, changes throughout time. So some things might not make so much sense to us because we don't really know how they ate in those days. Okay, you can put, or maybe you have to put, it's not so clear. Either you have to put the hot water in the middle. What's the purpose of the hot water? The hot water is not for tea in the middle of your meal. The hot water is for diluting the wine. Okay, there's a lot of wine drinking going on at Leila Seder, right, at the night. And therefore you need, and why is it in the middle? Because who's doing the wine? There's someone called the shamash. We're going to meet him today. He's the guy in charge. He's the butler, so to speak, for the meal. And we can put it in the middle. It seems like, again, there's different ways to understand this. I'll go with Rashi. Rashi says, you put it in the middle. Hamecham. Shem Rashi says, if you look about 10 lines from the bottom in Rashi, you would heat up the water in order to dilute the wine. Risha'in latepa. So Rashi's understanding this Homish is, this is all you can if you want. Why would you do it? So it's convenient for the shamash. So he doesn't have to, right? Imagine the shamash has the hot water all the way in the corner of the room, and then he has to bring it to this group, and then he has to go all the way to that group. So you're allowed to put it in the middle. What would be the issue to put it in the middle? So first of all, Rashi says in the next line, you might have thought you have to do things differently than you do normally, and you don't. Obviously, this must have been, if you had two groups, they would usually put the hot water in the middle. What would be the issue? He says, even though you're splitting between the two groups, you're almost making this indicator by putting the mecham in the middle that we have two separate groups here. That doesn't bother us, okay? Even though they're all eating the same korban pesach, right? It's just that we split it into two. Now, when he gets up he gets up from his spot and he goes to pour. He has to keep facing. Now, the issue is the shamash is a little bit tricky because he eats with a group, but he's also serving both groups. So he has to be careful to keep his face turned toward his group so people don't suspect him of going to the other group. Now, what's the issue of going to the other group? Well, you're not allowed to move from group to group. We're going to see that. So therefore, we don't want people to suspect the shamash is eating with the other group if he's turned to face toward them. Okay, so he does that. He kind of turns his face away. We're going to see a lot about this turning the face away, turning it toward his group, away from the other group, until he gets back to his space and he eats with them. So you see he's in like this interesting position because he's working, right? It sounds like many of us at the Seder, right? We're serving, but yet we're also part of the table of what's going on. Now we get an interesting thing, which is the kala, a newly married woman, can turn her face, does turn her face. Okay, Rashi says, and he bases this on the Gemara later, shehi busha, she's embarrassed. You know, the assumption here is that she must be eating with her husband's family the first year, and she doesn't really know them so well, and it's a little embarrassing for her. she's allowed. Now, even though now the whole turning your face away was you can turn your face away from the other group, okay? Because you're eating your group and they're eating in their group, even though, again, like I said, you're all eating the same meat. But if this is a case where you split it into two and say, we're going to eat this part of the animal and we're going to eat this part. You don't have to, but you can, although we're going to see a debate about this whole issue. But you're in these two separate groups. Even when she's in her group, even though it kind of is rude for her to turn her face away, although we're going to talk about later that maybe it's not, we'll get to that at the end of today's stuff. But when she turns her face away, it's allowed because we're being sensitive. It's interesting, right? Like, why is she embarrassed? And it shouldn't be that in society, right? This new kala should be embarrassed. But the fact is we understand that she might be embarrassed and we allow her to turn her face away, even though she might look like she's not being part of this group. Okay. So the Mishnah starts off and says, the Gemara starts off and says, Manin Mani. Who is this Mishnah according to? Rabbi Yehuda, this Mishnah matches Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Tanya, we're now going to see a braita with a machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Starts off with the verse, Al habatim asher yochlu oto bahem. It sounds like there's multiple houses in which you're eating them. Melamed shapesach ne'echal b'shtei chavurot. That teaches you that you can split the Pesach into, you can theoretically, the people can eat them in houses. That means theoretically, we can split our meat into two groups. After, right, we're all manoi on one korban, but then we can split into two different groups. They could even eat in different houses if they wanted, right? In our case, they were in the same house. Theoretically, they could eat in different houses. What about the person though? Can I, if I'm part of this korban Pesach and I start eating in one group, can I move to the other group? Because theoretically, it's all, right, I was part of this korban. No, you cannot do that according to Rabbi Yehuda. Talmud Lama, b'bayit achad ye'achel. Because it says, right, on the one hand, it says alabatim, plural houses, that you, plural, will eat them. But then it says it has to be eaten in one house. That means once you start with one group, you can't move to another group. Mikan amru, now we're going to get back to our shamash. This is a great line. Hashamash. Sha'achal kazayit b'tzara tanur. This is classic, right? We nibble in the kitchen, right? So the shamash is there in the kitchen and he starts eating next to the oven, okay? He nibbles on a piece, he's slicing the meat and he takes a bite. Uh-oh, he's a bit stuck now. So because now he started eating there, he can't eat somewhere else. So ipikachu, they're going to give two possibilities. If he's smart, what will he do? Fills up there because he already started eating there and now he can't eat anywhere else. But then, this is the nice part, it says, if the people want to be sensitive to him, what should they do? They'll come and they'll move their whole chabura to eat next to where the oven is, right? Not always doable, depending on the space. But theoretically, they should all move over and eat next to him, and that way he could be part of the chabura and eat together with them. Otherwise, he's basically messed himself up, right? So it reminds me of on Sukkot, right? When you're in the kitchen, you can't really nibble on the food because you have to eat in the sukkah, right? So it's the same idea here. Even on Pesach, apparently, you can't nibble in the kitchen, okay? So you have to be careful about doing that. Okay, next, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon has a different position. Rabbi Shimon Omer, he teaches to learn something else from there. This teaches Dafka, you can eat in two different places if you want. Can you eat in two different chaburot though? No. In other words, you can move your chabura from place to place, but you can't eat in a different chabura. What's the root of their machloket? The Gemara says this very simply, but it's not so simple to understand. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, yesh aim la masoret. Rabbi Shimon Omer, yesh aim la mikra. We've seen this before. Aim la masoret means we're going to go based on what the way it's written, and la mikra is the way it's read. Okay, so now Rabbi Yehuda says yesh aim la masoret. So Rashi brings up a suggestion about what this means, and then rejects it. Okay, it's not so clear which, right? The Gemara kind of says it as if we all know, and it's obvious which words we're even talking about, but it's clear that it's not so clear. Tosfot also raises some, questions about this. But Rashi, will go to the end of Rashi. Rashi says when we say bebayit achad ye'achel, that we're talking about the word ye'achel. Ye'achel, theoretically in Hebrew, should be written with two yuds. Ye'achel will be eaten, but it's written in the Torah with one yud, which could be read as yochal. So if we go by bamikra, how it's read, it's ye'achel. Ye'achel refers to the korban. it will be eaten, the noseh, the subject, is the Korban Pesach, which sounds like b'bayit echad yechel, that you can't have chaburot. That's Rabbi Shimon, right? It has to all be eaten in one. So it can't be eaten in two chaburot, okay? So now, right, so again, Rabbi Shimon says, let's just review. He says, ha'ochel ochel b'shtei makomot, you can eat in two places, but you can't eat one animal. This goes, people were asking this question before when I was talking about the two chaburot. You can't eat one animal in two chaburot, he says. It has to be one animal. You can move places if you want, but it all has to be eaten together, okay? And that's because b'bayit echad ye'achel refers to the Pesach itself, which comes to exclude chaburot. B'chidarshinan yochal, but if you say it the way it's written, which is imlam nasoret, the way it's written, yochal, who's yochal? You will eat. B'bayit echad, you will eat. It's talking about the person, the gavra, a gavra. Mashma l'me'ute mikomot. This says, right, it will be eaten by you, right? That comes to exclude places. You have to eat b'bayit echad, one place. Okay, so that's the way Rashi explains it. Again, it's a little bit not 100% perfect. There's some questions exactly about this, but we'll leave it at that. Hayu yoshvim. So now we're going to bring two nafkaminot, right? Two cases where there'd be a difference la'alacha between the two opinions. Hayu yoshvim. Let's say we were in a group. V'nifresa mechitza beinehem. And all of a sudden, I don't know how, but somehow there's a wall that's put up between us, right? A mechitza doesn't need to be a wall. It could be a halachic wall, right? Anything 10 tefachim high. This brings us back to our world of Eruvin, Sechet Shabbat, where we talked a lot about mechitza. So if all of a sudden there's some separation between us, if you say the Pesach can be split up into two groups like Rabbi Yehuda, so no problem, we can continue to eat. But if you say you have to all eat the Korban Pesach together, that's Rabbi Shimon, you have to stop eating. Basically, you're now two chaburot and you have to eat it all together as one. What if, let's say the reverse, Hayu yoshvim, this maybe is more realistic, V'nistalka mechitza beinehem. You had a wall and then it broke, right? Someone, this is classic, right? One of the kids were playing, they knocked down the wall and, all of a sudden you don't have a wall anymore. So now this is interesting. You might not have thought this, and this is why we're going to see someone else disagrees with this understanding. If you can eat in two different places, they're now going to say you're no longer in the place where you were originally because you were in a place that had a wall. I was on the left side and you were on the right side, right? Let's say. So now it's all one space. That's a different space than we were before. And you can no longer continue eating the korban because you're now in a different place than you were before. But if you say, sorry, that's what we just, right. If you say, so if you say, we don't care, you can eat in two different places, that's fine. You ate here, and now we're calling this a different place, even though you're sitting in the exact same seat. We're considering this a different place. So if you say that, then you continue eating because it's no problem. But if you say one person can eat in two different places, then you're going to say Ein Ochlim. So Yativ Rav Kahana kapashile mifshat. Rav Kahana sat there saying this very simply, the way we just did. Amalei Rav Ashi, the Rav Kahana. Rav Ashi says to him, "V'tibai lachibai." But I have a big question on this. Silug mechitza v'asiyat mechitza mihave kishnei makomot ukishnei chaburot ame or lo? Is putting up a mechitza or taking down a mechitza really changing where you are? In other words, that's not just because there's a mechitza up. You were sitting here eating before, you can continue eating. And just because the mechitza disappeared, you're still in the same place you were before. So what if now there is a separation, isn't a separation, right? It's the same question we kept asking all the time about mechitza. Do we apply all the laws of mechitza anywhere where, we're talking about designated spaces? Maybe this issue of chabur is not connected to mechitza or not. If you're still in the same place, it shouldn't really make a difference. So he questions that, and the answer he gives him is teku. Like, maybe you're right, and I don't really know. Now we're moving on to the Kala, and we'll get back also to the Shamash, and we'll see some interesting stories. HaKala hofechet et paneha ma'itayma. What's the reason? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, mipnei shehi bosha. Because she's embarrassed or shy. Okay, it's a little hard for her, so she's allowed to turn her face away, right? Someone wrote in that, right? It's like the classic. I'll think of an example. When I was growing up, my brother had a girlfriend, and whenever she came to our house, she wouldn't eat. It was just like a thing. Even though she was his girlfriend for many years, she just wouldn't eat. And it was like a whole thing in my house. Why doesn't she, Jewish house, someone doesn't eat, how could that be? So, it's classic that women sometimes are shy and, they don't want to eat. So she'll, turn aside and eat like that. Rav Huna bereid Rav Nachman. Now we get a story. Ikla lebe Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Huna, the son of Rav Natan, comes to the house of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Amrule. So the first thing we're going to see all different kinds of things they say to him and his response. First thing they say to him is Mashmecha. What's your name? Amar lehu. He says to them Rav Huna. Okay, simple. Amru. It seems simple anyway, right? He says my name is Rav Huna. Okay. Amru native Marapulia. They said why don't you come sit down on the bed? Yativ sits down on the bed. Yave lekasa. They give him a cup of wine. Kible b'chad zimna. He took it right away. Vishatya b'trei zimne. And he drank it in 2 gulps. Below ahadar ape. Now we see why this is connected. And he didn't turn his face away. Okay, now all these actions were taken, the people there were taken a bit by surprise by his actions. Again, this is classic, etiquette. Like what's etiquette for one person isn't necessarily etiquette for somebody else. What you see here is, already we're going to see that it seems that it wasn't just the Kala who did this, but in certain circles, it was common for people when they drank their wine to turn away. Not sure why, but it seems like, maybe a little embarrassed they were drinking wine. I don't know, but they would turn away when they would drink. So Amrule, so they start questioning him now at the end, after this whole thing happens. They say, my taima karit lach Rav Huna. Why did you say your name is Rav Huna? Why didn't you just say my name is Huna? Why did you call yourself Rav Huna? So Amar Lahu, Baal Shemani says, listen, this has been my name for a long time, right? This is what everybody calls me. I went by what everybody calls me, right? And maybe he's trying to say I'm an important person. My time, ki amrulach netiv apulia yataf. Why did you sit down on the bed when we offered you to sit on the bed? Now you might think, what else were you expecting him to do? But sit on someone's bed, right? Think you go into someone's house. Again, probably it was a little bit different than nowadays, but you don't normally go and sit on the person's bed. Amar lehu. Everything the Balabayit says, I'm supposed to do, right? I've always learned this is proper etiquette that I was brought up with. If the Balabayit says to you do something, you're supposed to do it. Here's a funny thing. It says in parentheses, chutz mitzeh, unless he tells you, leave my house, then you don't have to listen to him. So what's funny about this? It's in parentheses, which means you shouldn't read it here. The Meiri says that this was added by like jokesters who wanted to add like mock things and added that into the Gemara. He claims it's very interesting commentary. My time at kiyav le kasa kibalt b'chad zimna. So why, when we offered you a cup, did you take it at one right immediately? Now again, this is similar to the bed, right? But he could have said komashu mar l'chabal abayit asay, but he says a different answer because he has a better answer here. Amar lahu misarvim lekatan ve'em misarvim legado. When there's someone prominent, you don't say no to them. When it's someone smaller, you say, no, thanks. No. You're supposed to say, no, I don't need, no, thank you. But if it's someone important, Rashi says we learn this from Avram and Lot, right? Because Avram said, stay here, right? And they said, Kain Taseh, we'll do exactly as you say. When it came to Lot, it says, Kibbur Rachov Nali, no, we'll sleep outside. And then it says, Vayiftzar Bama'od, and he begged them to stay inside. So when it came to Avram, they just said, yes, sure. And when it came to Lot, who was obviously smaller than Avram, less important, then they said, no. And then he said, yes, right? The classic game of, we all have people that we go through this with, this whole kind of funny game. Oh, no, thank you. And then the person's going to say, yes, please, I insist. So you don't do that with an important person because you don't want to bother them to go through that whole ritual. But it is a ritual that people do often. So there is place for it. My time at Ishtite betrei zimne, why did you drink it in 2 gulps? Amar lehu, he says, Ditanyas, it says in a Braita, you're like gluttonous if you drink it all in 1 gulp. Shnayim derech eretz, 2 is the proper way to do it. Shlosham migasei haruach, if you do it in 3, that's already arrogant, right? It's like balance, okay? Not too quick, not too fast, not too slow. My time alo hardet apech, why didn't you turn your head around when you drank? Amar lehu, kala hofechet paneh hatanan. Now what we understand why this is here. So we said about the kala does that, but nobody else does it. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, another story. Ikla lebe Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Yossi ben Lakunya. So it's interesting in this especially Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi was a big Talmid Chacham. Comes to us Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rabbi Yossi ben Lakunya. Yave lekasa, they give him a cup. Kible b'chad zimna v'shaki b'chad zimna. Took it at once and he drank the whole thing at once. Now what did we just say? You don't drink it all at once. Amrele. So he says to him, right? It's interesting, these reactions of the people to these rabbis who come, who are prominent rabbis, and then they start asking them, why'd you do this? Now, you could say in a number of ways. Either they're asking, what are you doing? or they're asking, we want to understand because the way we learned it was different and we want to learn from you. So it could be out of respect. Don't you hold right? We just said it's not nice to do that kind of thing. Since this wasn't relevant, because yours was, you gave me a small cup, and it is less than a revi'it of a quarter of a log, which is the usual shiur. You gave me less than a cup. Number two, it was sweet wine. It doesn't apply to sweet wine. And number three, I'm a big guy. When you're a big guy, that doesn't. And it actually comes up elsewhere. I saw it was quoted in the Schottenstein, I think that there, or maybe in the Koran. I saw one of them. It said that it's quoted elsewhere in a Rashi about him being a heavy man. So therefore, it's all not relevant for me. What you start to see here is, again, there's individuals, right? We're talking all the time about these chaburot of Pesach. And now we start to see this whole issue of, well, there's individuals within the Chabura. It's our classic, right? There's community, and then there's individuals. And you have to also look out for those individuals. And individuals, there's sometimes exceptions to the rule. There's sometimes unique circumstances. And now we're going to end with this interesting idea, which is this going back to the shamash, right? The shamash theoretically works for them. On the other hand, he's also eating the Korban Pesach. So we saw some issues that might come up. Let's say he nibbles in the kitchen and then he's stuck, and maybe people should go, and sit next to him. But now we're going to see something else interesting about him. So Amar Rav Huna, Bnei Chabura nechnesim b'shlosha v'yotzin afilu be'echad. When they come in, the person serving doesn't need to start serving until three of them show up. As if there's not three, he doesn't have to start. You can't say, oh, I'm here early, give me food, right? You don't have rights to that. He can wait after. But once three people come in, he starts. But yotzin afilu be'echad. But if one person stays late, he has to wait until they finish. Okay? Amar Rabba, v'hu da'ayil be'idana derigile l'me'al. But that's only if he goes in at a time when normally people go in. Now, if he showed up very late, then the shamash doesn't need to stay later to entertain him. V'hu diragash b'hu dayala. Okay, what is this? That's if you tell him beforehand. This is what Rashi says. You can see v'hu diragash b'hu dayala, the two lines from the bottom. Shehudiu lashamash shezeh darkan latzed echad echad. Lefisha torachu l'shamesh hayechidim. We have to be sensitive to him. It's a big headache to stay and wait for individuals. So you have to tell him in advance. What did this remind me of? When you go to a hotel, and right, lots of people in hotels do seders. They do them very short, and the hotel staff usually just assumes, right, it'll be a late night, but it'll be till 10 and we'll be done. But other people only start at 10 or 11 o'clock or 12 to eat. So right, we always tell if we've been at a hotel, we've told them at the beginning of the meal, we just want you to know, otherwise they sit there, can we serve? Can we serve? Right? So you have to tell them, listen, we're going to be eating much later, so just be prepared. So likewise, they're telling you have to tell him, that our minhag is that people are going to leave one by one, and you might be left here with one person. But if he doesn't know before, it sounds like you can't really do that. Last line, I'm a ravina, v'notnim schar damim. You have to pay him for his work. If you're the one who leaves last, you have to pay for the overtime, so to speak. Okay, so you have to pay him for that extra time. Interestingly, they paskin that we don't hold that way, even though it sounds like it's a good idea. And with that, we finished our perek. And again, I think it's very interesting that they finished the perek all about this Korban Pesach. Like I said, it's eaten in these masses of people, but with this perspective on the individual and the sensitivity that we need to have, even though there's rules, well, the kala can turn her face away, we can be sensitive to her needs. And the shamash, we have to be sensitive to his needs, and we have to make sure to pay him appropriately. And we have to make sure not to torture him and, have us all stay very, very late and leave him stuck, waiting on one person. So there's all these sensitivities that come up anytime you do something communal. You have to be concerned for all the individuals within the community. That nice idea. We will finish that parak and start with our new parak tomorrow.